All right. Thanks everyone for coming today. I'm going to call this meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is to approve and receipt of our agenda items. May I have a motion?
So move.
Councillor Davis moves and seconded by Councillor Arneson. All those in favor?
Aye.
All in favor. No one's opposed. All right, and so we have item up for discussion. There are actually two items up for discussion, but they are related to each other. They came at two different dates, but I understand we have a presentation from staff that'll sort of bring the two together, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So are we ready to have someone from staff? I don't know if that's Mr. Seffi. Are you going to be introducing the topic for us today?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a number of staff with us today to, as you said, respond to Council's direction with respect to two items that are very much related. We have Mr. Larson, who's the manager of our Water Resources and Environment Department, and he is supported by Mr. Resby, who's our groundwater specialist, and they are in a different room than myself and Mr. Zweig, who, as you know, is the director of our public works and more familiar with the issues around the Murrayville system. So we'll begin with Mr. Larson. As you know, the two topics, as I said, and as you said, Mr. Chair, are very much related. So it's really just one presentation, and Mr. Larson will deliver both components of it. And if there are any questions, we'd be glad to respond as part of the presentation, or maybe at the end of your discussion.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of council. Can everybody hear me and see the first slide? Hold on for the first slide.
We hear you, but we never can see the staff. So I miss you so much.
We only get the staff's voices.
Can everybody see the slide?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. I'll get going then. So thank you again. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of council. My name, as Raman mentioned, is Kevin Larson, and I'm the manager of Water Resources and Environment. And Raman also introduced the rest of the team that's here with us this morning to assist as needed. Asher Risby, he's the township's groundwater hydrogeologist, and Roland Zweig, who most of you know is our director of public works. So this slide is just a brief presentation of the outline for this morning. So a little bit of background and history. And as Raman mentioned, the items will be broken down into two related but different topics. The first being the groundwater use and long-term supply planning. We're going to talk a little bit about the overview, the township's usage of groundwater, some of the benefits of using groundwater, and our supply management and planning, considering population growth and future growth in the township. Second item, of course, Murrayville and Brookswood water quality improvements. So again, an overview of the issue, some of the costs and recommendations and alternatives for addressing that issue, which we'll get into. So this is a bit of a background and history for the two items. The first item was a result of a memo from June of this year that was referred to CPC meeting. And that was that we discussed the long-term water supply. And my understanding is essentially the question and concern of whether or not the township should continue to use groundwater as a water supply source now and moving into the future. The second item is related to the water quality issues that were identified last year in Murrayville and Brookswood. And those were essentially quote unquote dirty water issues, which is essentially manganese precipitating out of the groundwater, causing a coloration to the water that's not appealing to the residences in some areas of Murrayville. And as you know, both Brookswood and Murrayville systems are interconnected. So what we do kind of in one area impacts the other area. In October, a report went to council requesting that $6 million be added to the 2021 budget for council's consideration. That would be for the construction of 3 localized water treatment plants and for the authorization for staff to get going on the detailed design work so that those facilities could be constructed next year. So we'll get into the details of those at the second part of this presentation. As I mentioned, we're going to start with groundwater use and long-term supply planning. As the township's population grows, of course, so does the demand for water. So the township has and continues to rely on 2 sources of water. One is from Metro Vancouver surface sources, specifically the Capilano Reservoir. And the second is the township's local groundwater aquifers. So this slide is just a simple representation of the major water cycle and the township's major aquifers. So as you can see from the aquifer illustration, there are quite a number of aquifers in the township, and they vary geographically, but also in quality, depth, productivity, vulnerability. There's interconnections between aquifers. So as you can imagine, it's quite a complex system. We have 14 major aquifers in the township that are used both by private and municipal uses. Some of the uses include farm irrigation and other agricultural uses. For example, nurseries, greenhouses, cattle, poultry. There are also industrial and institutional uses, especially in areas where there is no municipal water being provided. And of course, municipal and private wells that are mainly used for drinking, but also other purposes such as lawn irrigation. It's also important to recognize that groundwater also sustains our local ecology, including fisheries, and it provides stream flows. So it keeps water in our creeks and rivers during the dry season or summer months. There are currently 9 active wells in the township, and all of those are blended with Metro Vancouver water. There are some wells that we have that are not online currently. So the 5 wells that are in Brookswood and Murrayville that we'll talk about shortly due to water quality issues. Tall Timbers well in the Salmon River Uplands was recently taken offline as it was connected to the East Langley water supply, which is a Metro Vancouver source. And the township's last remaining small community system of Acadia is planned to be taken offline and also connected to the East Langley water supply system and within the 5-year horizon. So for every bit of water that we withdraw from an aquifer, an equal amount of recharge must occur if the aquifer is to remain sustainable. Rainfall is by far the largest source of recharge for the aquifers, with most of the recharge occurring during the winter season. So today is a perfect example of all the dry spell we had all summer. Those aquifers are being recharged today. Another major source of recharge is interconnections from adjacent aquifers and seepage from rivers, creeks, lakes, and ponds. So just like the groundwater supplies water to these creeks and streams during the summer months when it's dry, it's opposite in the winter. So those seepage from rivers, creeks, and lakes are also contributing to recharging our groundwater during the winter months. Of note, specifically, septic systems only account for a relatively minor and local source of recharge, and that septic systems can also degrade water quality due to contaminants such as nitrates and heavy metals. When the township utilizes groundwater as a source, staff manage groundwater on a technically informed basis and in a sustainable manner. As I mentioned, groundwater has historically and continues to be blended with Metro Vancouver water, and the aim of this blending is to obtain a balance between environmental and economic sustainability. The water demand in the township is expected to continue to increase with growth and within the township and within the region in general. Since 2015, the overall municipal groundwater use has been decreasing, both in percentage and total volume. In 2015, more than 50% of our water was from groundwater. And by 2019, that dropped to approximately 38%, with the remaining 62% being made up by Metro Vancouver water. The reasons for this reduction, you can see the reduction on this slide. So the goldish colored bars are the amount of water, groundwater that's been used by the township in percentage from 2015 to 2019. As you can see, that's been decreasing. And the blue line is the amount of Metro Vancouver water we've been using. So you can see that's been conversely increasing. So the reasons for this is no new wells have been constructed since 2008. As I mentioned, we have 9 wells currently in use, which is down from 19 just 10 years ago. The township also shifted to real-time demand management using a SCADA system, which stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. And this is essentially a system which will shut off our wells when water levels get below a certain level. As I mentioned, some of the wells have been taken offline or decommissioned due to a number of reasons, such as water quality concerns or connection to the East Langley water supply. So for example, East Langley water supply was commissioned in 2016. And with that, we've had a significant reduction in groundwater withdrawals, especially from the Aldergrove Aquifer. In fact, almost by 50% in that area. Groundwater is recognized as a shared renewable resource to be managed sustainably. So our operational strategy has been to utilize groundwater where feasible and sustainable, and supplement with Metro Vancouver water whenever required or wherever required in order to minimize impacts to the environment. In general, water levels are maintained at a certain threshold beyond which the groundwater supply shifts over to Metro Vancouver water. This is an automated process. This slide represents some of the benefits of using groundwater to the township. There are 2 main benefits, the first one being economical. So groundwater is readily available and source aquifers are typically close to where the water is needed, thereby requiring far less conveyance infrastructure to bring the water supply to where it's needed. It's also relatively clean and pathogen-free when you compare it to surface water, thereby typically requiring less treatment and associated infrastructure. The township's consultant assessed that on average, groundwater from conventional wells is 6 times more economical than purchasing Metro Vancouver water. So the water droplet figure that you see in front of you represents cost to the township for utilizing our own municipal wells versus purchasing Metro Vancouver water. And this figure is already out of date because Metro Vancouver rates continue to increase. The second benefit of groundwater use is that our local groundwater systems provide resiliency and redundancy in case of emergency. For example, if the Metro Vancouver supply is ever shut off due to system failures, a natural disaster, or for any other reason, the township has that system in place that we can continue to provide water to our residents and businesses, while other municipalities in the Lower Mainland may be in a worse off position. In fact, some of the other Lower Mainland municipalities, including the City of Vancouver, City of Surrey, and City of Maple Ridge, are all working to develop their own local groundwater sources for building their water supply and for resiliency, which is a shift from their past practices. This chart illustrates how Metro Vancouver rates have been rising over the years and the resulting cost to the township. So the chart on the top shows an increase in the total amount of Metro Vancouver water purchased, which is the blue line, and the cost to the township from 2015 to 2019, which is the green line, or the lower line on that top chart. So for example, in 2015, the township paid approximately $4.5 million to Metro Vancouver for water purchases. In 2019, that cost was over $7 million. That's due to 2 things. One, that we were using more Metro Vancouver water than we had in the past. and 2, because the rate had increased, which is illustrated on the lower chart. So the lower chart shows that Metro Vancouver water rates have increased each year. And this is showing all the way back to 2015. So as you can see from the 2 lines, Metro Vancouver charges more for water during the peak demand or summer season than it does at other times of the year when the demand is lower. So the upper purple line represents that summer rate and the lower orange line represents that winter rate. Metro Vancouver water rates have increased by 22% between 2015 and 2020, and these rates are expected to continue to increase annually to pay for infrastructure throughout the region. The township's management of the groundwater supply strives to balance the economic, social, and environmental considerations in harmony with the goals and objectives of the township's sustainability charter. As such, groundwater use is supplemented by Metro Vancouver water to maintain sustainable aquifer water levels and to minimize potential impacts to creeks, rivers, and other users. The township continuously evaluates our operations and undertakes necessary assessments to better understand the long-term water demand and availability, current system limitations, aquifer capacities, impacts of our municipal water extraction, and changing uses and demand as a result of growth. As a result of the work and assessments undertaken, municipal well operations continue to be modified and optimized for sustainability and efficiency. As the region and the township grows, water demand is obviously expected to increase. This bar graph illustrates the predicted relationship between population and water use in the township for the next 20 years. As expected, as population increases, this will translate into an increased demand for water use. There are other stresses on our aquifers other than municipal use that we must consider, which include agriculture, institutional, industrial uses, and of course, private wells. So just looking at this graph, the purple line is the projected population up to 2041, and blue line illustrates the estimated annual water use by 2041. The township's current groundwater infrastructure is currently projected to not be able to meet future demand. Maintaining the status quo and not developing any new groundwater supply sources means that the township will have to rely more and more on Metro Vancouver water supply. This chart shows how the township will need to increasing rely on Metro Vancouver water, as I mentioned, if the status quo is maintained and no new systems are constructed. This would translate into increased costs for the township and its users, and it would also reduce our resiliency to emergencies such as natural disasters. In consideration of the rise in groundwater uses and demand, the township has completed assessments of long-term groundwater supply resources, considering current and future demand, both from private and municipal sources, environmental protection, and considering climate change. In addition to long-term planning studies, the township, along with provincial collaboration, we've been building a groundwater monitoring network for the purpose of research and early detection of potential issues, including short and long-term trends in aquifer capacity and quality. Currently, there are 12 monitoring wells within the township. The township also contributes to public awareness campaigns and various outreach and education initiatives on an annual basis and collaborates with senior government agencies. Collaboration is important not only to better protect our groundwater resources, but it also helps prevent any conflicts among various groundwater users. A reminder that the province of BC has full jurisdiction over groundwater extraction and use. As local government, the Township of Langley's jurisdiction over water extraction and protection of our local aquifers is limited to land use regulations. The township has no say regarding private groundwater uses, such as domestic wells, wells for agricultural use, etc. However, staff collaborate on a regular basis with the province in the joint interest of protecting and preserving these groundwater resources. Township has a strong record for the protection and sustainable use of groundwater resources based on a scientific approach as evidenced through hydrogeological studies undertaken over the past number of years, including some detailed modeling work that was completed in the mid-2000s, the 2009 Water Management Plan, and more specific studies since 2014, including the groundwater protection and management, municipal groundwater demand and planning, impacts of municipal water extraction, future demand from private and municipal uses, and analysis of benefits to the township from the continued use of groundwater. We know that there will be a gap between the future demand and current supply for water, that Metro Vancouver water costs are 6 times more than groundwater and continue to rise annually, and that any resource development must be done in a sustainable manner. Some recent studies have identified that the current capacity of municipal wells will be insufficient to meet the future demand, mainly in 2 primary areas, one being Brookswood and Marieville, and the other one being Northwest Langley, with the highest demand predicted in Northwest Langley. The Fort Langley aquifer could be used to increase well field capacity in the system to increase overall water supply capacity. The study looked at a number of options, including radial collector wells, which are horizontal wells essentially drilled underneath the Fraser River, and aquifer storage and recovery systems, and of course, conventional wells. Based on detailed review, several options were ruled out due to a number of limitations, and the preferred option was identified as conventional wells. One location identified as a potential was the Salmon River Natural Area, which is shown on this slide, next to the development of Bedford Landing along the Fraser River. It's a township-owned property, and operation of a well field at this location has predicted minimal impacts of climate change, well interference, and base flows, and it's been considered technically viable based on initial assessments. Construction of wells could either be constructed all at one time or be phased as water demand increases in the future, and there's pluses and minuses to both of those options. To further explore this feasibility, next steps would include meeting with the province to discuss current requirements for an environmental assessment, environmental flow needs, and First Nations and stakeholder engagement. It would also include or necessitate the development of a work plan, providing step-by-step direction on development of the source, final cost estimates, a well field and waterworks construction strategy, list of regulatory requirements, and identification of critical paths. A work plan would include refinements to the engineering and economic analysis, and also communication strategy. This was the basis for the memos presented to Council earlier this year. And based on the work conducted to date, the next steps would be to proceed with the preparing of a work plan for potential development of sustainable groundwater supply sources to maintain the township's current ability to continue to utilize a blended system of domestic drinking water supply consisting of local groundwater supplies and regional bulk water purchase. That concludes the first area of topic for today's presentation. The next relates to Marieville and Brookswood water quality improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I'm wondering if it might be helpful to, maybe I can get some help from you as well, but whether it might be better for us to answer a few questions up to the content so far and then move on with the rest of your presentation, or do you feel that the rest of your presentation is better done in line with what we've already talked about?
Entirely up to you, Mr. Chair. I think the additional information may better build the picture, but if you feel that there's top of mind items that council would like to discuss now, that's fine as well.
Okay, well, I mean, I do have a number of people that have indicated questions. I'm wondering if the council would prefer to ask some of these now, or would you prefer to wait until Mr. Larson has finished his presentation? Is there anyone who really wants to ask?
Yes, I think we should ask questions now before we go any further.
Okay, let's do that. I think that makes sense as well. So, Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Whitmarsh. I just don't get how taking groundwater is sustainable. There has not been an argument made here that makes me believe that we should continue to draw down groundwater. So my first question is, if we stop taking groundwater, would Langley flood because there would be too much groundwater? That's my first question. My second question is, putting in 3 new localized water treatment plants, how is this a sustainable use of water? And how many jobs does this create within the water utility? How many additional jobs? And my third question is, well, basically, if we stop blending water, would this result in a job loss? And my next question is, why would we want to, with everything that we've heard about climate change and sustainability and everything else, why would we want to continue to take water out of our aquifer? We don't meter. I mean, if this plan was coming forward to us with a requirement that we start metering water use, I could maybe say yes, but to me, this just continues on what we've done all the way along for the last 20 years that I've been on council, and which is just not sustainable. If we're not metering, people are not watching. And how will we make people watch how much water they're using with no metering? So those are my questions to start. I'm just very upset about this whole idea that taking groundwater is okay. It's not.
Okay, Mr. Larson, or else Mr. Seffi. I'm not sure who wants to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start, and hopefully Mr. Larson can assist. I guess the first question was regarding potential flooding. If we stopped drawing water from the aquifers, the answer is no, the quick answer. The second question was regarding the loss of potential jobs, or maybe the requirement for us to have additional staff if we went one way or the other. I guess part of the next component of the presentation maybe would have addressed that question, in that we are currently resourced and structured to be able to not only extract water from the aquifers in a sustainable manner, but also we have the staff resources and the technical knowledge and expertise to treat water that we extract from our groundwater. In Aldergrove, as you know, we have had for many years a water treatment plant in Aldergrove that treats the groundwater that we extract sustainably, to assist us with the blending that Mr. Larson discussed. So it will not result in the need for additional staff resources if we were to implement additional treatment facilities as is contemplated for Maribel slash Brookswood. And in terms of, I guess, the continuation of extraction and how it is sustainable, I was hoping that Mr. Larson's presentation would have addressed that, but evidently it did not. I guess with respect to the metering, it's a separate question. With respect, I think those of us who were with the township or on council will remember many years ago, there was an attempt to implement a universal metering system, which was rejected based on the public feedback. It is something that certainly staff would be interested in exploring further. With respect to the implications of the metering, not on individual basis, but on the overall system basis, it has proven to be cost effective. It has proven to result in more efficient use of water resources. I hope that addresses the questions, but I will ask Mr. Larson if there's anything that he wishes to add.
Thank you, Raman. Just a couple of points. One on the flooding. To paint a picture in council's mind, these aquifers are interconnected to other aquifers through seepage to rivers. The rivers lead to bigger rivers and eventually the ocean. So it's a global water balance, I guess you could say. So there's no danger there. Regarding sustainability, groundwater is scientifically known as a renewable resource. So as long as we're putting back as much as we're taking, that can essentially pretty much go on forever, provided that the source does not get contaminated and become undrinkable. So for example, typically we see dips in the groundwater levels in the summer, and those return to normal levels in the winter, and we can confirm this through our years and years of monitoring. Thank you.
Okay, a follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, speak. Mr. Chair.
Just allow this follow-up question, and then we'll move on to another councillor.
Yeah. Well, Councillor Long will know, because he sat for how many years on Metro Vancouver, that the theme coming out of Metro Vancouver is quite clearly, we need metering throughout the region. And those areas who do not meter are doing a disservice to the entire region because they are not metering. And that slide that went up there that looked at population versus water use, particularly up to 2041, shows us why metering is important, because we're using more water than our population is growing. Why? We have no way of measuring this. Water is not free. Water has a cost. And so I would like to know, how come we're not even going to consider metering if we're going to continue to draw down our aquifers? Just saying because it's 12 cents per cubic meter if we use our aquifers versus 72 cents per meter meter is a reason for us to continue to draw down the aquifers does not make sense to me. We have to encourage behavioral changes, allowing us to continue to draw down. And I'm sorry, but I live in an area where a lot of people are on wells, and they are seeing the effect every year of continuing to use groundwater indiscriminately in order to supply areas that do not have metering. So I would really like to know, how come we would proceed with this without looking at metering as a co-requisite of going forward?
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you would like staff to respond or not, but it really is a policy direction that staff will take from council if it's something that council wishes staff to proceed with or explore. As I said, it has been something that has been discussed. We are currently, the system that we have in place, the requirements that we have in place does require for all new residences to have the ability to house a meter at some point in the future, should that decision be made by council that universal metering is something that we want to do. So people will not be surprised, so to speak, at least new residents as we grow will not be surprised. It may be an issue for some segments of the population, but new growth has been anticipated this since 1997. Our bylaws do require a meter setter, as we call it, box to be put in at the property line that will at some point upon council direction be able to accommodate a meter system. So we're in essence, we are, dry lining, if you will. We're providing for a future scenario. We are anticipating a future scenario, again, subject to council direction.
Okay, thank you. I think that's clear that this is a council decision. It's not a staff decision. It's a council decision, and that's something that we can look for in the future. So let's move on to some of our other councillors. I'll go by the order that shows up on my screen, so I apologize if it's not quite exactly it, but Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted, I don't want to belabor the point, but I totally agree with Councillor Richter, and this was something that was discussed at a policy level. I think it was last year, maybe a year and a half ago, and I distinctly recall that there was not a political consensus to go forward with conservation, but I agree that pricing is going to be a particular interest in conservation. My personal opinion is that Metro is going to start charging more water for those communities who aren't on meters for that very reason, just like we have a differential between the summer and winter based on what water is available. So I do see in my looking glass that, well, or whatever I use to discern what's going to happen. I think that will happen. So, but I do have some questions. So I just wanted through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff to thank you very much for this presentation. I thought it was very interesting. My questions arise mostly around the possibility looking into the future to create a well system which, I'm going to use layperson's terms, you can correct me or define it differently, but the proposition that water will migrate into a well from the Fraser River and other sources, which I believe is the intention of where we could have a northwest Langley well network. And so I did have some questions about that specifically, if I could either address them, I guess, to Mr. Larson or Mr. Safey. So I'll just fire away. So first of all, I gleaned that this was very good technology in the sense that it's relatively inexpensive to utilize. And from an engineering point of view, it does seem to potentially reduce the amount of chemicals and filtration that's needed for some existing bodies of water. So it could make less cost for potable water. So I'm wondering though, if the intention to put it where it's being proposed, why specifically would it be there? Is it its relative relationship to the Fraser River and the water migration from there? I know we have land there, but is that currently staff's opinion and that's the best placement? So that would be question number one. I'm also interested in the salt wedge that we know is moving up the Fraser River. And I know that the migration of water, you know, potentially salt will be taken out of it from that. But just if there's any implications for the salt wedge, if we are looking at that kind of technology. And Mr. Larson's alluded to the fact that the province would have to be involved. That answers one of my questions. And but just speculatively, I wondered how long it could be. I know it's a long process to go through all the conditions and consultation, but you know, would this be 10 years out? You know, would that be sort of like a baseline of what we might consider in order to get it online? No, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seffi, or maybe Mr. Larson, if you have a response.
Yeah, I would defer to Mr. Larson. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first question I heard was proposed to the location or regarding the proposed location. And that location was picked for a number of reasons. For one thing, the township currently owns the property, but that's a minor consideration at this point. The main reasons being the relationship to the Fraser River. The Fort Langley Aquifer extends under that property, and also due to the sufficient riverbank filtration that is there, so that will provide treatment, if you will, between water that is essentially coming from under the Fraser River that would be supplying that well. So it'd be filtering that. The second question I heard was related to a salt wedge, and I'm looking at my hydrogeologist here to help me out, but he's telling me that there is no salt wedge or
no salt intrusion either from sea, and there is no salt yet for within 300 feet.
Okay, so if he's telling me where there was salt identified at the depth, it is not applicable to our proposal for this well. Different depth, different layer. The geology would take care of that issue.
And no sea intrusion, sea salt intrusion is expected.
Okay, so yeah, so no salt intrusion expected. I'm just going to try to maybe seek some clarification on the third question, because we were discussing the salt wedge, but as I understand it, you were asking how long it would take to do the environmental assessments, the stakeholder engagement, and get up and running with the new well.
Councilor Arneson, is that correct?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to clarify. Yeah, it's more or less the degree to which there is sort of a known process, and our estimation, I'm wondering if it's 10 years out. And the reason I'm asking that question is, if we anticipate that, would it be based on council direction, obviously, to start putting money towards this project and looking potentially for other sources of funds in the meantime to, to create a reserve or a fund for that opportunity when it crystallizes, or if it does take place?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. Yeah, so what staff have proposed in task 3, which is a relatively small in terms of costs, next step, anticipated around $30,000 from existing funding, is to help us answer some of those questions. So it's to develop what those critical paths are, what the regulatory requirements are, to get a better idea of the final cost, to determine who our key stakeholders are, if there's any First Nations requirements, those types of things. However, we do anticipate that we will require a detailed environmental assessment. We will require communication strategy. We will require First Nations consultation and engagement. And some of those things could take, I'm just going to guess, but a year or two. Another thing we've identified is that we need approximately 3 wells to meet our projected demand to 2041. At a cost of approximately $2 million per well. So depending on the desire of council, that could be done all at once to save some of the consultation and the various steps that have to go along with each well. That could all be done at once, or it could be phased over the next 20 years. So one well, approximately $2 million, which could be added to future budgets.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We are going to try and have the rest of the presentation at some point here, but so council members, I'll ask to try and keep it somewhat short so we can hear the rest, but we will move forward. Councilor Davis?
You always say that when I'm coming up, don't you?
Not on purpose.
Okay. I have a couple questions, and a lot of it's been covered, but I just want to clarify again, 12 cents versus 72 cents. Was that that was in 2019? Okay. The other thing is, you say that 10 years ago, we had 19 wells. And I think I heard you say we have 9 active wells now, and we've shut 11 down. You didn't say you shut 11 down, but we had 9 wells were active. And then I thought I heard you say we had 12 monitoring wells. So are those 12 monitoring wells, are they going into it? Like what does a monitoring well mean? Is that like a big well that's got a big area, or is that a well that we're monitoring on somebody's property to try to see what the aquifer is doing? I have okay, should I carry on then? Okay. About 4 or 5 months ago, I believe Metro Vancouver came out with a survey, or it was a pamphlet. We received it, and it showed where the water went. And I was per household. And they had a figure there of 14%, correct me if I'm wrong. It was 14%. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it, of leakage. And I thought, wow, boy, oh boy, in an emergency, 14%, even if we just had 14%, it went to the right spots, it would help out. And that that's just a comment. But I think the thing that I'm concerned about also is, as stated, in 2015, we had 50% metered wells. 50%. We were mixed. In 2015, we had mixed water by about 50%. 4 years later, we're down to 38%. And I keep hearing this water resource is supposed to be a renewable. But boy, at that rate, we're not doing that well. No pun intended, but that's going to be an issue. Just in 4 years, it's gone down that much. I can look around, and I think in my little area here in Milner, and I can, there's a lot of wells I've seen that have just stopped. Maybe we were taking too much out over in our spot, but still, that's an issue. Anyhow, you know what? I'm interested. Thank you very much for coming to this. This is a very important resource that we have, and we need to keep monitoring like you guys are, because we need to know where we're going, because the cost anyhow, I'm going on, but I just think that in Fort Langley, I drove past there yesterday down Billy Brown Road, and I looked to the right and I said, hey, this is a swamp. The water was so high in there. The whole area. I know Logan's used to plant corn in that little area and it was all flooded. Everything right now is flooded. But I just thought, are we going to have problems putting a well in a swamp if it's a swamp in the wintertime? I don't think so. I think the technology's there, but all concerns. This is a really important subject. Okay, I'm done. Sorry, I went on too long. Thank you. Thanks,
Councillor Davis. I don't know if Mr. Larson, you have a response at all to any of the comments that were made by Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 12 cents versus 72 cents. That was for the years 2015 to 2017, an average. Yes, 10 years ago, we had 19 wells and we're currently using 9. That's due to a number of reasons, some of which I discussed. So some changing guidelines and regulations where the federal government reduced these standards, wells being connected to these Langley water supply, the water quality issues, those types of things. And the monitoring wells are different from our municipal production wells. So those 9 wells currently active are our production wells. We're withdrawing water and providing it to our businesses and residences. The 12 monitoring wells is a network of wells that we've been developing along with the province in partnership. And those are essentially to measure groundwater levels through various aquifers and also to measure water quality. So we can collect samples on a regular basis and see if there's any contaminants or precursors for contaminants that we need to look for. So those monitoring wells are typically installed on township property in small buildings or kiosks, and they are largely maintained by the province. So the province puts up their telemetry systems and their solar panels, collects the data, and then shares that with us. So it's done in partnership. You're talking about leakage. Leakage is inherent in any water system. So when we talk about leakage, it does include leaks in the system, but it encompasses essentially any water that we can't account for that's not metered. So despite the fact that we don't meter individual residences, we do meter the township's use of well water and of metro water. So we meter zones. We have a number of zones that we've divided the township into based on pressure and our systems. So we measure, and we also meter businesses and some residential, but it's not universal. It's more on a smaller scale. So some of the things that leakage includes would be firefighting, flushing our system. So we have an annual system where we flush all our pipes and hydrants and those types of things. So all that water that is lost through that process is included in that leakage number. You asked about the reduction from 50-50 percentage down to 38% groundwater use from 2015 to 2019. So that's not a reduction in the amount of groundwater available in the system. That's just the amount of reduction that the township has used. So we've shifted a higher focus onto Metro Vancouver water use and less on groundwater use. It has no indication of what health our groundwater supplies are in.
Okay.
And number 5 had to do with the potential siting of a new well. And my understanding is through the analysis of our consultant, which is Golder, that it was deemed a suitable site. And I can't comment on the wetness of the site in the winter because I haven't been out there, but I can confirm that they did look at multiple locations and it was identified as a site that was best suited based on preliminary assessments.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to ask the same questions over and over again. Thank you, Mr. Kevin Larson and staff. I did want to say, I think it's good you talked about the emergency. If there's an accident either in the system or somewhere else, that Langley is well prepared to go into using our groundwater for emergency purposes. And I'm very happy to hear that Maple Ridge, Vancouver, and Surrey were introducing or exploring the idea of, for emergency purposes as well, putting in groundwater. I do believe it. I still believe it's a sustainable resource and it does replenish on an annual basis. If we had some really bad years as far as drought or something, that would be different. I know that in our system, that's already been mentioned already, is that, yes, we do have meters, I think either industrial, commercial, and others. And I believe from a development point of view, when a new development comes in, meters are put in, whether they're hooked up or not, I'm not sure. Is that not the case? That's one of my questions.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Ferguson is correct. Yes, for all of the non-residential users, we do require metering. First part. Second part, as mentioned earlier, we do provide for future installation of a meter. So the box goes in, but not the actual meter itself. We rough it in, if you will, to avoid future additional costs. So it's minimal cost at a future date. It would be just a matter of purchasing the meters and then dropping them inside the box with no system improvements necessary.
Okay, and I've been aware of that for years. And also leakage has always been a problem. Even at a normal household level, people got to always watch their leakage and educate themselves. Education is also important. And the modeling, I like the report. Thank you very much. It's a very good report. And I still think, if I'm not sure, Mr. Larson, whether you would know or not, but we've got many wells in Langley, both private, agricultural, and maybe even industrial throughout the community. Is that not correct?
Through the chair, correct, Councillor Ferguson. Our best estimate is approximately 5,000 wells for private domestic use, not including agriculture and other uses.
So that's been the history of Langley. I think we've had a very good model. Thank you very much for the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Kunst. Sorry, you're on mute, Councillor Kunst.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I know it's not over, but I just wanted to follow up on a question about the Salmon River uplands. Having lived in that area, we did regularly have to get water, but and I'm not sure if you answered it in a way that I understood, but the impact of having this blended water, how does this impact that area in the Salmon River upland, and would it help them, or would it actually continue to diminish that water supply? Through your worship to staff.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just waiting to see if Raman wanted to jump in. So the township doesn't have any municipal wells within the Salmon River uplands, Uppington Aquifer. We did in the past. Those have been turned off for a number of reasons over the years, including water quality issues. So there was a change in the standard, I think, for maybe Roland requires manganese. And we've also, for example, earlier this year connected the community of Tall Timbers to the East Langley water supply. So that's another reason. Some of the wells in Salmon River uplands, there are different layers of the aquifer. So some are quite shallow, which are impacted more during summer droughts, and some are deeper that have less of a problem, depending on the year.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Long.
Yeah, thank you very much. Could we back that slide up? There was a next step slide for the conclusion of this. Yeah, there you go. And so this is a good slide for me to be looking at. And I just want to make a comment, Mr. Chair, that in the initial, when this presentation first began, Mr. Larson, you said, and maybe Mr. Safey, that this was to discuss whether we should be switching our water supply. And I just want to make it, so often I notice on council that these thoughts are put forward, whereas there is no motion of council anywhere to say that we should be changing, going to metro water instead of groundwater. A few councillors have made comments about that, but that's not a direction that has been given by council. So I don't think there's any motion, unless there's a motion on the book somewhere that I'm not aware of. We're just having a good discussion here, but the concept of switching from groundwater to fully metro has not been a decision of council, and it is an opinion of some councillors and different from others. So unless someone wants to argue me with that, that's a statement I just wanted to make sure was out there. Listening to all the other comments has been very interesting. As Councillor Davis has pointed out, the aquifers are full to the brim right now, right? So they are definitely renewable resources. Is there any doubt that in the winter months when the rains come that the aquifers don't fill up? Because I mean, some on council are talking about preserving this water because they're worried it's going to run out. But if it fills up every rainy season, it fills up. So maybe I can have a comment from staff, Mr. Chair, on the recharging. Are we confident?
Is that a question, Councillor Long, to staff? Okay. Maybe Mr. Larson, the question about will we have problems in recharging our aquifers at the winters and rains that we have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Councillor Long is correct. Staff consider the groundwater resource a renewable resource, and many of our aquifers are unconfined aquifers, which means there's no confining or clay layer between the aquifer and the ground surface. So those are directly recharged from rainfall. Some of our deeper aquifers have a confining layer, so a clay layer, and those are recharged by a number of ways, but predominantly through interconnections by adjacent aquifers. So rainfall, as I mentioned earlier, really is the primary recharge driver, with other more minor sources as well.
Okay, and the new proposed site in the Salmon River, which is right near the Fraser, you've already explained that will be recharged also from from the flows of the Fraser River. So that's a good thing too. Now, I just wanted to touch on metering, because it seems to me many years ago, we looked at an example that Surrey was doing, which was a volunteer metering program. So can staff talk about that? Did we not embark upon that? I don't believe we did. If not, why not? And, you know, were there some successes with Surrey in terms of volunteer metering?
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll take a first stab at this one. It is certainly something that has been done in some of the municipalities in Lower Mainland. Surrey is one, as well as Richmond, as we understand, has tried this in the past. We have not done that here in the township, as there was no direction to proceed on that basis, but it's certainly something that can be a test, if you will, a pilot in terms of a transition into a full requirement for universal metering.
Good. Okay, and that's good. Now, a question briefly here on when you mentioned the commercial, like Councillor Ferguson talked about commercial, and of course, all commercial industrial is metered. And then, of course, I know about the box because my home had the box out front. But the multifamily apartments, are they metered?
No, Mr. Chair, none of the residential uses are currently metered.
So an apartment would just pay, the water fee would be based upon what, frontage, or how is that calculated if you have an apartment with 100 units in it, say?
Each one of the units within the multifamily development, multifamily form of housing, would have a flat rate, which would be similar to a townhouse complex, if you will, or a number of single-family residential units within a subdivision.
Okay. All right, so that's good.
Yeah, flat rate per unit.
So certainly, if we morph into a discussion about metering at the end of this presentation, Mr. Chair, you know, then the volunteer one might be a good place to start. And then I just wanted to highlight that has been said when he talked about the Salmon River uplands, because we do get a huge amount of concern from the residents there. And there's the thought that the aquifers are being drawn down by the municipality, but they're not. So that's a whole nother story. And if there's any clarification that the staff would like to give on that, otherwise what I heard, and I think the rest of council heard, is that there's no wells in the Salmon River uplands. So some of the areas that experience a residential loss of water in their wells is not due to the municipality drawing water, but more just the nature of the size of their well. So if there's a confirmation that I'm correct in that, I'll move on.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look forward to the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. I think what we'll do is move on to the rest of the presentation. We have about 25 minutes remaining in our time today.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to ask a follow-up question on Councillor Long's statement that we have proof that the Salmon River uplands wells are not being drawn down.
Okay.
I would like to know where that proof is, because I haven't seen it.
We don't use
through your chair, this is Kevin Larson. I just wanted to reiterate that the township doesn't have any municipal wells in that aquifer. So all the usage is by private wells, which is regulated via the province. So not through the township. Thank you.
So there is no proof that the township has, in contrary to what Councillor Long just said, correct?
We're not drawing from that aquifer.
I think the answer was that it was managed under the province regulates our usage of that area.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I've lived in the area for like 35 years, and I've never had a letter from the province telling me how much water I'm using or what the level is of the aquifer that I'm drawing from.
Right. Okay. I think that's helpful information. Maybe we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. Mr. Larson, are you able to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Over the last number of years, there's been reoccurring dirty water complaints in the Murrayville and Brook Brookswood neighborhoods. This is due to elevated levels of manganese and iron in the groundwater, which precipitates out when the township chlorinates the water. Following a motion by council on November 18th, 2019, staff temporarily shut off the 5 wells in Brookswood and Murrayville as a short-term measure, while staff investigated some long-term measures to treat the well water moving forward. So all 5 wells, so this is a map of Murrayville, Brookswood, and shows the well locations. All 5 of these wells exceed the aesthetic objective for manganese set by Health Canada. So an aesthetic objective is not related to health concerns or illness. It's related to the smell, the sight, the way the water looks to the end user, with the exception of Brookswood well number 10, which exceeds a newly implemented maximum allowable concentration for manganese. So this well could not be turned on without further treatment. Otherwise, it would not meet the current legal requirements. Staff retain the services of an independent qualified professional to study options for removing the iron and manganese from the groundwater as a long-term solution. They identified 3 common treatment options, and without getting into detail, we can provide more information if required, but one was oxidation and filtration using a catalytic media. The second one was oxidation and media filtration, and the third one was sequestration. The recommended option was the first one, oxidation and filtration using catalytic media, because it's simple and effective at removing iron and manganese. The proposed treatment plants are small, can be installed into shipping containers, which would save on construction costs and would allow them to be relocated if needed. So the pictures shown on this slide are just an illustration of what similar other treatment plants of this nature would look like that could be utilized in Murrayville and Brookswood. Just like to reiterate what Raman mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that water treatment is not new to the township or our staff. We have certified operators for water treatment facilities that have successfully been removing manganese since 1999 with a similar but much larger treatment plant in Aldergrove. And there are 3 treatment plants that are proposed for the 5 wells, and I'll just get into some rationale on that. So the following 3 slides are just conceptual layouts for the treatment plant locations with respect to the wells. Each site would require dedicated water mains to be constructed, which would convey the well water to the treatment plant. Detailed design would be required to confirm the exact location and configuration of each treatment plant. So for Murrayville's wells number 1 and 2, they'd be located, or it's proposed they could be located on an existing township parcel at the Murrayville Reservoir and Pump Station site. This conceptual layout requires approximately 650 meters of new water main to convey the water from the treatment plant to the well, or from the well to the treatment plant. Looking at Brookswood wells number 7 and 9, again, 1 treatment plant for these 2 wells could be located on an existing township parcel near well number 9, and this one would take approximately 150 meters of new water main. Brookswood well number 10 would require its own treatment plant, considering its distance to the other Brookswood wells and the cost of water main. This is the most economical solution, and this one is located in a residential area, would require modified landscaping to improve the aesthetics due to public visibility of this site. So again, 3 water treatment structures proposed on township-owned properties. All 3 locations would require further analysis to determine requirements for screening, fencing, noise mitigations, as the locations have, in some cases, nearby residential dwellings. The payback period is considered to be less than 5 years at a total cost of approximately $6.4 million. The payback period is quite short. This is due to the high cost of Metro Vancouver supplied water. So these treatment plants are essentially a simplified version of what we're currently doing in Aldergrove. So staff have recommended to include $6 million in the 2021 budget for council's consideration. For council to authorize staff to proceed with detailed design, utilizing existing funding, and subject to council approval through the budget process to construct 3 treatment plants in 2021 to address this issue. If this is not suitable, staff have identified 3 alternative recommendations for consideration. These are listed on this slide in order of most desirable down to least desirable. So the first one would be, again, for the construction of the 3 treatment plants, but to phase construction over 3 years in order to distribute the required capital funding. This option, however, would come with additional risks and costs and a slightly longer payback period. The second option would be to abandon the wells and continue supplying only Metro Vancouver water purchased for Brookswood and Murrayville. This would lessen our resiliency of the water supply system, and it would increase cost to the water utility. So for example, to supply Metro Vancouver water to these communities in the year 2021 would be an increase in approximately $1.5 million plus, slightly over $1.5 million. And the third option, which is not recommended by staff, is to continue to utilizing the wells without treating the groundwater. So this is not recommended because of the aesthetics of the water. So residents would continue to see what they consider dirty water. Additionally, as I mentioned, Brookswood well number 10 couldn't be turned back on without treatment in any case, as it exceeds the new requirements for manganese in groundwater. A brief summary of the issue. 5 wells were temporarily turned off in response to dirty water incidents. Water treatment is considered a long-term solution and is currently employed in other areas of the township, specifically Aldergrove. Staff recommend construction of 3 treatment plants for the 5 wells in Murrayville and Brookswood, with an estimated payback period of 5 years at a cost of approximately $6.4 million. Design could begin immediately with construction in 2021 if budget was approved. This is considered the most effective and sustainable approach in meeting the current and future demands. This slide is just a recommendation that was presented in the report to council in October 2020 and shows staff's recommendation. That concludes this portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I do have a few questions specifically on the last portion of your presentation. So Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for this presentation, Mr. Larson. Very interesting and building upon the earlier policy discussion we've been having. I had a question, so I'll just cut to the chase. My thought is that the cost of the conditioning or the alteration of our water to make it to an aesthetic and safe standard really, as Councillor Richter, I think, referred to, water's not free. And I just look at the implications of how much our groundwater is and what that cost is currently to users and Metro water. And I don't think we can compare them exactly. However, it seems to me our water might be underpriced, especially when we look at these treatments. So what I'm wondering, through Mr. Chair to Mr. Larson, is when was the last time that we looked at the water cost to our users of groundwater? Because I referred back to the provincial auditor report we had in 2019 that gave a very favorable review of many of our policies, but they indicated, I'm quoting, the groundwater operations do not currently have a full cost recovery approach. So I'm just wondering if staff could comment on that, and when was the last time we increased the cost of that water to our users? Thank you.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you.
Would you like me to start?
Sure.
That's fine.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair, that the costs that were referenced by Councillor Arneson, we are currently in the process of reviewing those costs. We do them on a fairly regular basis and make recommendations to council. That's one part. The other part is that it is not a cost that is distinguishable between, I guess, groundwater resources versus Metro Vancouver bulk purchase. What I mean by that is that it's a combined system cost of delivering water to the Township of Langley residents, regardless of where the water comes from. So it's a combined flat rate based on the blended system that we have. Mr. Larson, anything else you wish to add?
Thank you, through the chair. Raman's correct. I believe that we have fairly recently undertaken a cost analysis that staff are currently reviewing, and those numbers come back to council with when we're looking for rate increases on an annual basis. Yeah, and as Raman mentioned, it's a combined system. I believe that our philosophy or the way we operate is to try to cover our costs, but the township is not trying to profit on the water that we are selling to our users. It's a matter of covering our cost to either purchase the water or produce the water and deliver it to our customers.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick comment about that. I'm not talking about making a markup on our water. What I'm talking about is if we have to put in treatment processes that are going to be very expensive, it seems reasonable. For example, if we are looking currently at an increase, and understand it's a dual, well, it's a combined system, so you can't tease out the cost of our groundwater. However, I really feel that this needs to be included then in that cost and not a separate cost as if it sort of is in a vacuum, because it is a user cost, and this is what it's going to cost in order to make the water quality sufficient in order to satisfy our residents. So I strongly feel that we should be looking at that as a component of any future price increase, because I think it's appropriate. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, the recommendation that's before us, I don't support, and I would like to move option 2 that was on one of the previous slides. Now, I know, Mr. Chair, you're probably going to want to do what the mayor usually does, which is go through a discussion and then put a motion forward. But I'd like to make it clear that I want to put forward option number 2. And rather than the one that's before us here right now. My other questions concern the security of the treatment plants if they're in containers. I would really worry about this. Movable containers on a water system really makes me question security. And I would have a great deal of problem putting treatment plants into movable containers for that very reason. My second comment has to do with the map of Brookswood that was up first as a result of this particular part of the discussion. And I would like to see an overlay map of development relative to that map, because right now Brookswood is not developed. 10 years from now, Brookswood is going to be developed. And I'd like to see the impact of the development that's coming in Brookswood on top of that map. And the third point is a lot has been said relative to how well Aldergrove has done in treating manganese and iron over the last, and it hasn't been 20 years, because in the 20 years I've been on council, we used to take water from the Fraser Valley Regional District. Not from our groundwater. And in fact, when they raised their rates, that's when we decided that we would have to drill more wells in Aldergrove, deeper wells, in order to get water for Aldergrove.
A point of order, information.
No, Mr. Mayor or Mr. Chair, Bob Long does this all the time, and it's inappropriate. He does not have a point of order. He just wants to be interruptive.
It's false.
No, I am explaining history here that you are aware of, but maybe other members of this council aren't aware of.
We're not thinking of water. We've never taken water from Abbotsford.
Councillor Long, yes, we have.
Now Councillor Richter to speak, please.
And we made the decision back probably in the mid 2000s to drill additional wells in Aldergrove in order to not have to continue with our relationship, our contractual relationship with the Fraser Valley Regional District to get water for Aldergrove. So if the water in Aldergrove, the groundwater, has manganese and iron in it to the same levels that Murrayville has manganese and iron in it, I don't understand why we've had 10 years of constant complaints from Murrayville about dirty water. If we had the technology and we were using it in Aldergrove, why weren't we using it in Murrayville? And we weren't. That's what prompted this whole thing. So those are my comments, and I just want to make it clear that I'm going to, and I should be able to have the floor first to move option number 2. Thank you.
Councillor Kunst.
Mr. Chair, is staff going to respond to those comments because they're not accurate? Thank you.
Well, I'm fine to have staff have a response if they have a response to that. I think maybe it'd be helpful for me to know. I don't know if Ms. Bauer, you're here or not, but just today, are we going to be making a decision today to move forward, or is this was this on here largely for discussion purposes, and then it moves to council meeting for a decision?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, the Council Process Committee may make recommendations to go back to Council.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Maybe staff, I don't know if you have a response to some of the comments that were made. Might be just helpful if you have any brief comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure, I guess, how to frame our comments. I guess I have been personally with the Township of Langley, this is Ramin Sethi speaking, by the way, since 2000 for over 20 years. And we have not purchased water from the Fraser Valley Regional District, to my knowledge, in that time period. And we have had the water treatment plant in Aldergrove since that year. I believe the treatment facility was actually constructed a year prior to my joining the township in 1999. All of my experience and knowledge to date has led me to the conclusion that the system that we use in Metro Vancouver, which does not include, as you know, Abbotsford, because Abbotsford is in the Fraser Valley Regional District. The two systems, as far as water is concerned, are different in that the Metro Vancouver system provides chlorine for treatment purposes, whereas Fraser Valley provides chloramine, and the two systems do not match. There is a interconnection that historically has been there at the boundary that provides for emergency uses only in case of a major issue. What may have been, I guess, a point of some discussion or confusion, potentially, has been the fact that there was a system in Abbotsford called the James system, the Joint Abbotsford-Matsqui system for sewage treatment, that used to accept flows from Aldergrove area going east until such time as the Township of Langley came up with its own sewage treatment facility and sewage treatment plant, which was then subsequently demolished or disbanded and I guess reinstated with a Metro Vancouver system that now accepts sewage effluent from Aldergrove to go west as opposed to historically going east. I hope that clarifies things.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, we could go on for a long time, I'm sure, but that's helpful for now. I think we'll move to the next councillor, and Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. And should we go directly with the Metro Vancouver water? What happens to the wells and to the aquifer and also to the system that we're currently using? And would we be jeopardizing, should we have an emergency, would we not be able to then access the current system that we're using today? Through your worship to staff.
Mr. Chair, it depends on the council direction. Ordinarily, ideally, we would hope to have a permanent solution in place with some resiliency and redundancy that Mr. Larson spoke about. Having said that, if council was to direct staff to proceed with the alternate recommendation or the alternate resolution that was discussed, that would mean not utilizing our groundwater resources. It would really depend on what council is contemplating with respect to, I guess, future potential use of those wells. Council could direct staff to keep them on reserve or abandon them permanently.
One other question. Now we've learned that other communities are looking to do this, have sort of an independent water resource. Are they looking at the same kind of like localized water treatment plants, or are they doing something different? Do we know what say Surrey and other communities are doing to get their own water supply?
I will start and then look to Mr. Larson to provide some additional information, if any. But Mr. Chair, what we understand that the other municipalities are doing currently is in relation with exploring opportunities to develop their own localized groundwater resources, such that they are able to provide some level of relief in cases of either climate emergency or climate change or disasters of any kind. We are not aware of any specific methodologies that they may be looking at, nor are we aware of the water conditions that they may be exposed to that may differ from what we are encountering in terms of manganese and iron levels in Township Langley aquifers. Mr. Larson, anything to add?
No, you're correct, Raman. It's preliminary as far as we know right now. And in addition to providing that resiliency to disasters, they're also looking to supplement their Metro Vancouver source because they recognize that they can withdraw sustainably and economically as well. So it's a benefit to their water users.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So we're approaching the noon hour here. And I just want to say that the recommendation that's in front of us is really what we should be discussing. If councils want to vote against it, then I suppose we can look at options. But to hijack in, well, I don't know if I use that word, going to upset certain councils, I'm sure, but I don't think we're here to discuss the other options. We're here to look at the recommendation from council, and I certainly would support the recommendation with an addition about the metering, that we would ask staff to explore how we can get into a voluntary metering situation or something like that. So when you're ready, I too would like to make a motion, but I would make the motion that is recommended on the screen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, yes, thank you. It's been an interesting discussion. I know that not all wells have that difficulty with the aesthetics. That's my first question. As many of us, several members of council, live in the Brookswood Fernridge area. I certainly haven't experienced that myself. So I'm sure it just be one or two isolated areas or isolated incidents, but that doesn't mean to say we don't have to deal forward. I believe just a little more history. Thank you, Mr. Safey. From my understanding is that Abbotsford introduced several years ago, decades ago, the chloramine. And when they introduced it, there was one heck of a lot of media because there was a mixing problem initially, and killed off some fish in a small area in one of the creeks in Abbotsford. And the interesting thing is that the sensationalism got so bad that there was a story that every fish from Hell's Gate all the way out to Bowen Island was going to be killed. And they were so concerned about it. It hit the highest level of sensationalism. So everybody thought that was the case. And the next day we thought that Abbotsford was going to stop doing that and just, go to chlorine. That didn't happen. So today they still use it we missed out on an opportunity to partner with Abbotsford. We missed out on other opportunities in this past to put both metering and to put piping throughout the communities where Abbotsford and other communities at 25% dollars were able to do it. Well, Township of Langley wasn't. Okay, that's a little bit of history. And no, we've never had the Abbotsford water come to Langley as far as I've ever known. Okay, I wanted to ask, if I may, through the chair, there's quite a few systems that we put in containers, generators, storage things, everything else, not just Langley, but throughout the region. And the containers are very sophisticated nowadays. And they actually make an awful lot of sense. If I may, through the chair, is that not the case? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, yes, that is the case. There are, I guess, depending on council direction, there could be other options that would cost more, that would be more similar to a permanent structure. But there are cases that we have utilized what may be referred to as temporary structures for permanent facilities, or semi-permanent, I guess. There are no concerns with respect to the security of such use, nor with respect to, I guess, the movability of such use. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. In 2011, I had a tour of the water plant in Aldergrove, and I thought that it was to blend down the arsenic, because there was a couple wells in Aldergrove that were higher in arsenic, which is a common thing, not to get anybody scared. But I thought that it was also to blend down the arsenics, to get the levels down. The other thing is, I'm wondering, this container, I looked at that and the first thing I thought about is, oh, wow. I think what we're trying to point out there with the container is that it's easy, it's only money, but it's not as complicated. Like, you don't have to have a huge building. You can put it in a container. It's maybe supplied from the manufacturer, all rigged out, plonk it down, lock the door, so I mean, even if you put it in a permanent building, I don't think that's an issue with me. But really, if we look at the recommendations and we look at the three options, the third option isn't really an option. Just to leave, it's kind of utilize the existing groundwater resource without any treatment. This is not recommended by the Water Exceeds Establishment Water Quality Perimeters and is likely not accepted by residents. I don't think that's, honestly, if I leave my shower drip, 12 hours later, there's a blue stain on the bottom of it. I'm at the end of this line here, and I get a lot of chlorine. And I look at that and I think, well, better than going washing my hair. Okay, that was better than some water. Like, at least it's a quality. It's not dirty like it was in Murrayville. So really, I don't think there's three options. I think there's only the two options that are there, and both kind of point in a direction where we're going to have to treat the water, because water in the township is something that it's one of those things: roads, water, sewer, garbage pickup, that we have to deal with. So the last thing, the recommendation, to me, this means that we are going to move ahead, and we're going to look at the necessary details. And I think we're going to move ahead. And what started this, was Councillor Richter said, was the Murrayville thing. And I think this can be phased, because Brooks, in the Brookswood area, I don't know if I haven't heard, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not getting dirty water there. So maybe we can phase that, because if you look at, if we were to shut the wells down and go all with Metro, we'd have a budget issue that we can't get around. It's just going to go boink, and it's going to come up, and that we're going to have to deal with the budget issue. It's going to have to be taken out of somewhere else, plain and simple. And anyhow, those are my comments. Thank you. Thanks again, Kevin, for your report.
Thank you.
Everybody else there.
Councillor Woodward. Councillor Woodward, are you there? I don't see Councillor Woodward.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
now?
yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, we can hear
so
you.
My internet dropped off for about 10 minutes, so I got a bit of a computer malfunction. I just don't know if there's a motion on the floor or where we're at the moment.
There hasn't been a motion on the floor. This is the recommendation that came from staff. You know, my sense of it is that this was a referral motion that was from the council table referred to this council process committee. And so I think that because of that, we should make a decision on this recommendation, whether we want to take that back to the main council table or not. That's where we sit.
I'll move it, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I will accept that. And do we have a seconder to move this motion? Councillor Kunst. So this recommendation is on the floor for discussion.
Can I add an amendment, or I don't want to complicate things, but I think we should be looking at metering. So I don't know if that could be added in, or maybe that would be a separate motion.
I think I would
separate motion.
I think it should be a separate motion, and it could be something that we bring up at the council table as well, and not necessarily here at the council.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Could I make an amendment?
Sorry, Councillor Kunz, do you have an amendment?
I think what Councillor Davis suggested about phasing, as you know, we don't have maybe the same situation in Brookswood with the water. If we're looking at the dollar figure, maybe that would help us out with, you know, the money part of it, so that maybe we would just phase the Brookswood area at a later date, a year or whatever staff would think would be feasible.
What?
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'm open to other comments. My sense of it is that is something that we would bring to the main council table about whether or not we want to spread it over a period of a few years, or whether we want to do it immediately. I think that initially this starts the process of having staff, if this was to be our recommendation. Of course, it still has to come to the council table. Okay. We're not making any final decisions here today. It goes to the.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that's so that's something we could talk about in the future.
Yeah, we would debate it and discuss it. This is just really saying, yeah, we'll take it back to the main council table. That's the
okay. Decision. That's fair. Then I'll just I won't move that amendment.
Okay, Councillor Richter.
Yes, just on a point of order, I guess I had said that I wanted to move option 2 to go back to the council table, and I don't understand why we have totally bypassed that request and jumped into this particular request. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I can explain the way I'm thinking about it is that this wasn't a recommendation that came to the council table, and it was at that council table was referred to this council process committee to have a report from staff and to further discuss it. And so I feel that we should decide whether we want to continue with this recommendation to the council, to the main council table, or not. And if we choose not to move this as a recommendation, then we certainly could entertain other recommendations. But I think we have to decide today to either move this one forward or not first. And then if that doesn't go forward, we can entertain other options.
Okay, but the point is, this is the policy committee, and we're talking about a major policy with regards to continuing to draw down the aquifers to provide cheap water. And I don't think this should be going back to the council table. Yeah, I could challenge you, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to vote against it.
Okay, it's we do refer to this table, at least in word, as the process committee, which I don't know if that's substantially different than a policy committee, but it's now called process anyways.
Yeah, but the process committee is the policy committee. That came out of our last workshop with Dr. McIntosh, which basically said when we've got major policy issues in front of council, it should come to this committee to decide if we want to continue or proceed in a policy matter. And that's why this came to this committee, because it is a policy decision. It's a policy decision about why are we continuing to extract from our aquifers in order to provide cheap water. That's the issue that we should be discussing here, not this motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not gonna belabor that. I would have preferred the other motion. I think plenty of notice was given on that. We see that fairly often, that some councillors get motions taken and others don't. Getting quite used to that. The thing here is I think this is a bit, I don't want to be authorizing, I know it has to go back to the council table, but I don't want to be authorizing design work and expenditures starting the process of the 6 million or 6.5 million until we've gone through the decision of what the long-term preferred source for water is. I don't like the idea that we're off designing for facilities that we haven't agreed or agreed as a council to actually construct. It seems like if we're going to give initial approval to the design work, that we're essentially heading down the path of spending a significant amount, millions of dollars. To me, there's still some work to be done here in regards to whether this really is the payoff. I mean, I still want to come back to basic business principles, that the idea that we have somebody that gets water from surface sources that is in the business of treating and delivering water to municipalities, that somehow we're going to be better at that than Metro Vancouver is going to be. And maybe in some cases you get what you pay for. So I still would like to spend a lot of time and some thought around a long-term conversion to Metro Vancouver water supply. I mean, if we're going to be saving so much money doing this ourselves, are we going to start treating sewage water and black water ourselves as well? I mean, are we going to start building all these facilities because it might save us a bit of money? I mean, no one's suggesting that because it's absurd. And I think in the long run, we've got to consider just going with the regional supplier of potable water and stop tapping groundwater to save a few dollars. I think we've got to look at that more seriously. I don't think it's an hour and a half, and I think it's premature to be giving initial approval to design for water treatment plants, which is going to lead to millions of dollars. So there's no sense designing it and spending all that money to design it unless we've decided to spend it. And if people have done that, then that's fine. But there seems to be very premature to be heading down the road of long-term permanent water treatment when we have a perfectly good supplier that does it all day long. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Woodward. Just a question before I go to Councillor Long to staff. I just wanted to clarify that based on a decision today to move this back to the council table, there won't be any design work or any money spent. That will wait until a decision is actually made at the council table. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Long.
Yeah, well, I guess we all have our opinions, and then I certainly don't agree with some of that I've just recently heard. This is a policy committee meeting. We are, with this recommendation, approving this policy, supporting this policy, and continuing the practice that we've had for many, many years in the township. That's what this motion is all about. So you can vote for it or you can vote against it, but I don't see how we want to really mucky-muck with it in the meantime. If we're going to proceed with it, which I believe we should, then the vote will show itself both now and at the council table. And in terms of how we do it and where the financing is going to come from and how the utility is going to fund this is information that the staff can bring forward, and I'm quite trusting that they will do the right thing. It is a water utility. That means it's the money here is not coming out of general revenue, but coming out of those that are using the water. And I think we should be certainly, if we want to do something proactive, be going down the road in terms of metering, and I guess we'll see how that comes in a future meeting. But let's be clear here. This is not a race to see who can put a motion together first or whatever. This is a recommendation from staff. And if you certainly don't support this, then of course you have the very much opportunity to vote against it, but I will certainly support it. Thank you.
Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, no, thanks. No, I'm aware that the policy committee is not an authorization to proceed. I'm well aware we'll have one more crack at this. I don't know why we would send it back to the council table, though. I mean, come on. Why would we send this back to the council table unless the majority of councils made the decision to spend $6 million or $6.5 million and commit to an annual operating increase of $335? That seems to be what people are doing. If that's the decision they've made, I mean, I'll look forward to proposals to build a bunch of water sewage treatment plants as well, because apparently we're in the business of saving money and doing whatever is cheapest. I mean, we do get what you pay for in some respects. I still think that I get a lot of complaints from residents that maybe just don't filter up anymore. They just don't bother complaining anymore, about some of the more marginal water quality issues and the impact on household fixtures and a number of other issues. Certainly have experienced some of those myself. To me, it's a pretty simple one. In some cases, you get what you pay for. And I would have preferred some more time to dig into some of these numbers around payoffs and potable rates. And, long-term consumption, if we are one of the fastest growing municipalities, apparently we're going to be fairly dependent upon groundwater sources. Sounds like from what I heard, the provincial government can decide at any point in the future that we have to transition away from groundwater sources. They have the ultimate authority over those beyond land use. So we're investing millions of dollars in a resource that isn't even ours necessarily. When we have a perfectly good, reasonable provider for water services that we're sending a lot of money to every year in capital projects to expand that water system, that we're apparently going to be setting up our own water system to duplicate their water system. And in hindsight, just overall, it seems very silly to me, just from a basic business perspective, that we can get what we pay for. And so again, I look forward to notices of motion along the same principle to start constructing sewage treatment plants. Thanks.
Councillor Davis.
I just to clarify, Councillor or Acting Chair, this is it. To vote for this is going back to council, and they're going to utilize funding from current available in the water utility account to proceed with the necessary detailed design work. So when that happens, they'll come back to council and say, hey, is this going to be in the budget? Are we going to proceed? It was a complicated way to say, we're not just moving this along to the next step. Because I'm concerned, I listen to Councillor Woodward's, I don't know where sewage treatment plants come in, but I think that may be tongue in cheek, but I'm concerned that I'm spending the $6 million. I'm not really spending the $6 million right now. I'm just putting it back so that it comes back to council so that we can at that point, we can juice it up and put on our whatever we need, like Councillor Long said, metering and sewage treatment, like that stuff is not what we're talking about right here. We're talking about just moving this along to the next step so that we can get closer to fixing the Murrayville water problem and a couple other more wells. Is that right? Or have I complicated it?
No, my understanding of it is basically that we would be deciding that as a council today, based on what we've heard today, that if we were to move forward with this recommendation, that the council would agree that this, based on what we know today, that we would move this forward to the next council meeting. That would give us, of course, more time to think about it, more questions to be asked, and more information we could still get. But it would move back to the council table to continue the discussion. If we heard today that we now, based on information today, we don't agree with moving in this way, we could decide today that we don't want to move this back to the council table and do something different. So we're not committing to the $6.4 million today. We're committing to that based on what we heard today. There's enough there that we would like it to go back to the council table to continue on discussing it.
Okay, thank you for drawing that out. That clarifies what I'm voting for. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you. You know, it's interesting that today it's an interesting discussion. We've got a lot of engineers and professionals giving us some information about how these things work. I would caution council to look at Metro Vancouver and either province or even the feds for mentorship on any issue. We have had huge discussions and huge problems with Metro Vancouver over the years. We have worked out a good working relationship. We had a problem with our growth management, regional growth strategy, where we as a council in Langley were asked not able to make decisions about our own zoning within our own community. We took it to court twice and we won. But if we would have not won that case, all zoning or much zoning in the future would have gone directly to Metro Vancouver. Also, we did in the past, I'm sure that Councillor Davis is aware, we did have our own sewage treatment plants throughout Langley, including secondary treatment of plants. We had an excellent system. The reason we went to Metro Vancouver, and I was on the committee at the time, is we saved money. Instead of running 100% ourselves, we had 1/20th or something. It really worked out well. It was a benefit. That way is a benefit to the community. But running a whole bunch of extra ones wouldn't have been. Now, as far as we are a little bit of a jewel in the fact that we have a blended system. And I remember Mayor Scholtens at the time going to Metro Vancouver and explaining our Langley blended system. And they were very, very, very envious of the system, particularly if the Metro system was to go down. And at the time, they were introducing new measures for treatment, but many people in Langley. One last thing I wanted to point out for those of you that feel Metro Vancouver and the province and perhaps the federal government are the answer to all questions regarding Langley. I am not in favor of bringing the sewage treatment systems and the Greater Vancouver Regional District sewer and drainage blended system together. In other words, instead of 3 or 4 systems they have right now, putting them all together. I'm not in favor of that. The cost in the future for Langley will be expensive. So we always have to be careful. We always have to be watching what our staff's doing and preparing for our taxpayers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to be pragmatic given the time and the basis of the discussion. And potentially, I would like to ask through you to staff, what would be the downside of considering tabling for information this motion until such time as some of the other pertinent questions that I think are being asked can be addressed prior to this coming back to council. So just take a breath, have a pause, and look at this information and say, if we feel that there is a huge expenditure that we're directing ourselves towards, do we really know that we have the adequate amount of information that's being supplied today in a relatively short amount of time? So I do inquire to staff what would be the outcome of just tabling this until some future time when questions regarding this, the expenditure and other things can be addressed. Thank you.
I'll second that motion to table.
Yeah, I can maybe just get a response from staff here first, just to hear what they have to say. I don't know if I see Mr. Backens here and Mr. Seffi. I don't know if one of you could respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start. Council certainly has the purview to table or defer. I think in this circumstance, it's probably better to defer until a certain time or event. I don't think we need to refer for any more reports. I think the suggestion is really to defer it until some known time. Tabling would just actually put it into in abeyance until there was a motion to lift it from the table. So just so that the mover and seconder are aware of the process, which I'm sure they are. And the last point then would be, all it would take on our part is some I guess, procedural clarifications going forward, depending upon what happens with the budget. Now, Mr. Giuseppe, you may want to comment as the timeline, of course, because these things always have a functional timeline. Are you there, Mr. Giuseppe?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair, to what Mr. Backen just referenced. Staff would be, I guess, or was looking for some kind of a direction in anticipation of the next step being, I guess, as part of the budget discussions, potentially adding some costs into the 2021. But if that is not the desire of council, and it's rather, I guess, to be tabled for some future additional discussions, that's fine. There are certainly no urgencies in terms of proceeding from our perspective.
So just a question of that, Mr. Backen. In a council process committee meeting like this, we can defer it here, or is this something that you wait and you defer once it gets to the council table? That's just procedural question for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly. Right now, the matter is before the CPC committee. If, for example, the motion were defeated, then it would just be lying there and there'd be no further action taken until a separate independent motion was to be launched regarding this topic. As to tabling it here would mean that it would have to be returning here, and likely deferral would have to be here as well. So it would be deferred to a certain time so the committee could continue to further their discussion. So whether it's a tabling or a deferral, it would be resident with the committee until it is resurrected, unless there's a other directive from council themselves to consider the motion, which council always could do, because of course they are the senior body to all the committees, including a committee of the whole, which is the CPC committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Long?
Yeah, I just hope that you're going to call the vote. There's plenty of time. It's not going to come to tomorrow's council meeting. It'll probably be a couple of weeks, so there's more time to think of it, create some more arguments, maybe get some facts correct for, so we can do some research and know what we're really talking about. So let's vote on it, and it's still going to come back to the council table for full discussion.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
There too.
There was a motion to table and a second to it. So the motion to table, which as I understand is not debatable. Why aren't we just voting on the motion to table?
I don't know who's running the meeting here. I didn't hear a motion to table.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to get a response from procedurally with tabling or deferring, and I was trying to get that information. So I think that's helpful. Councillor Arneson, you did suggest tabling. Is that a motion you'd like to make, or is that more deferring, or what are you interested in doing anything? I know you spoke about it first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the circumstances, I would actually like to amend the language. I did intend, based on feedback from staff, to somehow manage to put this to another date. And Mr. Backen has helpfully qualified that this should probably be deferred to a subsequent meeting. So I will make that motion.
That's a deferral motion to a subsequent CPC.
I will second that motion.
Okay, we have a seconder. So I will, can't see anybody. I wonder if we could just, maybe if we could stop sharing the screen and I can see people. Okay, so, all right, I guess I'll call the question on.
No, I've got my hand up on deferral.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of overcomplicating these things, Mr. Chair, I think, and the deferral means we'd have to have another CPC session on this. It sounds like we need to have another discussion or repeat this discussion or exercise more opinions at a council meeting, because at CPC, we're just discussing policy. So I think we need to move forward to that. The deferral motion will not accomplish that. Deferral motion, as Mr. Backen said, means it'll come back to a future CPC. So if that's the vote, then I certainly won't support that. But I don't know why we're so worried about it. It's going to come to council. It'll be fully discussed at council, and we can deal with it there where it belongs. We've had the discussion. That's why we have these sessions, and I think we have plenty of information. So to be clear, Mr. Backen did say, Mr. Chair, that a deferral means it wouldn't go to council. It would come back, what, in 2-3 months from now? Or the next CPC, I'm not sure. So please, let's not support that. Let's just get to the council table.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. You know, I kind of agree. Well, if are we getting any closer to solving dirty water in Murrayville? That's what I'm concerned about. So if it does come back to a CPC, what really would change at that point? Other than time, we have time to think about it. We have other ideas. I guess I'm saying nothing, but it's what's actually going to change, other than it's good to have more time, but we're not solving the water problem in Murrayville. Dirty water can ruin white sweaters. I mean, and it can make you turn you off water and a whole bunch of things. So remember, that's one of the things that we as a council need to address. So I don't, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
I just take exception to Councillor Long's phrase, it's just a policy. It's not just a policy. It's a commitment.
I did not put emphasis on the word just, Councillor Richter. Thank you.
No, but you made the point, it's just a policy. It's not just a policy. A policy is something that commits the corporation to action, including financial expenditure over the long term. That's why we have this committee, to discuss policies that will commit the corporation. So I don't think taking it back to the council table is going to solve the issue right now. I think Councillor Davis phrased it quite well. I do not think that putting the Murrayville back on blended water is going to solve the Murrayville problem.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you. Well, in trying to solve the problem, I may have just continued to stir the pot. But a couple of thoughts that I had is I'm in principle in agreement with the fact that if we are moving forward in something that's going to either create a new expenditure category that we didn't have before, or make a determination about if we would like to address an alternative, that is very consequential from a budgetary point of view. That is $6 million that we're talking about for the next couple of years. And I understand that there's an opportunity to continue to discuss it, but I feel today's opportunity has not given us adequate time to drill down successfully into the kind of questions that are very substantial questions I think need to be asked, and they need to be addressed before we make a decision, hence the idea for a deferral. And I did have a question through the chair to staff. Isn't it the case that in the interim, we could carry on and purchase the water as we have been doing for Murrayville while we continue to consider this as an alternative? That's my question.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I think the question is best addressed by myself. The current situation can certainly continue, which is purchasing water from Metro Vancouver. The cost of that, based on current rates that Metro Vancouver charges, is approximately $1.5 million per year. Mm-hmm. That will be in effect in perpetuity, subject to changes that Metro Vancouver deems appropriate to the water rates based on usage and costs across the region. Unless there is I guess, an alternate solution, which is what staff is recommending. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, just on the deferral here, I would like some more time with this one. I mean, I don't like the idea that we're committing to build millions of dollars in water treatment infrastructure based on an hour's conversation. I mean, I think it's more of a philosophical question for me than necessarily whatever's cheaper we must be doing. Again, it comes down to you get what you pay for, I think, in some respects. I don't see us building sewer treatment plants. It's not really in jest. I mean, we don't do it because it's provided by Metro Vancouver, but apparently that kind of logic doesn't apply to the water infrastructure. We don't get it from the premier supplier in the region who's an expert at it, getting it from surface sources. We're building apparently a redundant infrastructure of our own to pull it out of the ground, which, you know, it's not clear that that's going to be a sustainable solution for decades. I mean, I would prefer to invest in infrastructure that's permanent. I prefer to get it from an outsourced supplier. So for me, I'd like to spend some more time with this. I mean, I don't see the harm in delaying it a little bit. We're rushing this, it sounds like, to get it, you know, to the council table for the budget. But we do, as Councillor Arneson highlighted, we have a current solution that's in place. People are getting good quality water, which they weren't before. However they perceive it, and however staff want to characterize it, they perceive it. That's what matters. They were not getting quality water, and now they are. And so for me, that matters a lot. And so I would prefer that we take some time with this. We have a solution in place. The way I look at it is we're looking at spending, you know, 6.5 actually, was what I heard in the presentation, $6.5 million in capital expenditure, an additional operating commitment of 350,000. So if we are not to do that, the Metro Vancouver solution is free for the next 5 to 6 years. That'd be one way to look at it. Not that we have to spend all this money in order to save money. We could just keep buying the water from Metro Vancouver and not spend the $6 million and actually spend that on infrastructure that we should be building, at least philosophically in my mind. So I don't see the rush in this. There's a solution in place. If people want to get to this early next year, they could bring it back to the council table at that point and pre-approve it for the 2022 budget and have it under construction next year as well. It's not a decision to me that has to be rushed. It really does feel like we've decided to head down the direction of localized water treatment based upon an hour's conversation. Thanks.
Councillor Long.
Well, it's been a lot more than an hour that we've been talking about this very motion. The Aldergrove treatment plant has been there for many, many years. So we're not talking about temporary solutions. We're talking about long-lived solutions. And I keep hearing these words, cheap water. And I definitely don't agree that that's what this is all about. We're talking about resiliency and having a safe water supply is what we're talking about. And every day that we're buying water, if we want to talk about money from Metro, it's costing us far more. And who knows what the price of water is going to be in a few years. And this whole concept that we're going to get something for free, well, that's just not, that's just nonsense. I mean, you're going to save. It says, the report says that $6.5 million is going to be paid back, because that's the money we would be spending with Metro if we didn't do the thing. So anyhow, and I don't see there's no rush by any means. There's no rush. In fact, the report was what, from January or June? Anyhow, so I've already stated my case, but I wanted to, to emphasize that it's not about cheap water. That the council really should think about the resiliency. Look at what the other people are doing north of the Fraser, and other communities are thinking the same way as we are. As Councillor Ferguson says, we're very proud of the blended system we have. It's almost a perfect opportunity. You can blend when you need to. You can use the water resources when you need to. It's kind of a win-win. Anyway, let's get a vote because we have another meeting in 20 minutes.
All right. Thank you. So this is on the deferral, and I will call the question. Those in support of deferral, raise your hand.
Aye.
Councillor Arneson, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Woodward, Councillor Davis, Councillor Richter, and it's carried. It is deferred. Those opposed would be Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, could you please, for the clerk, confirm who is opposed to the deferral?
Yeah, Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kunst, Councillor Long. Okay, thank you. And let me just check here. I think that's
move termination.
Move termination.
Termination.
Yeah. And a seconder. All in favor?
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Just before we all depart, because of the scheduled meeting times, I'm going to suggest we start the next meeting at 1:15. Under the procedural bylaw, we must start it by 1:30, but that will give us about 30 minutes then to prepare for the next meeting, the budget session. So if we could just make a note to recommence at 1:15, and we'll put a note up on the internet that we're starting at 1:15.
Would you prefer 1:30 and leave it there at 1:30 since we can do that?
That's up to council. I think we can make it do at 1:15. 1:30 also works. That's to the extent, though, of our flexibility. We cannot go beyond 1:30.
Okay, I would suggest 1:30, but unless there's some strong opposition from council, I'd suggest 1:30.
We may need the time.
Well, we may, but
okay.
But the budget's 3 months of discussion.
Okay, I'm teasing. Thanks.
All right, 1:30 would be good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you then.